This is a response to a patient's mother who's considering taking her young child for a auditory processing test at a larger hospital or one of the more conventional places for testing. And I wanted to talk for a second about what types of things are in a typical auditory processing test versus what we tend to do in our combination of a diagnostic trial with an auditory processing test. First of all, one thing that everyone I think needs to understand is that auditory processing testing is not well regarded as being a gold standard. It's based on originally looking at children, but more often adults who have acquired auditory processing issues, who have had some sort of trauma, like a blast from a grenade or a tumor or a malformation with, blood vessels that caused a stroke. And when we consider the children and adults that we are testing who don't have that kind of a physical issue, they are still being directly compared against those who do to decide whether or not they're going to get accommodations, which I think is a real issue. And forgive my phone because I had a major problem with my phone. I posted about this, and unfortunately, Facebook really likes to layer different articles along with videos and so forth, and they made it really hard to read. So I'm going to go through this directly. A typical auditory processing test, as I'm saying, and I'm going to also attach the article from Dr. Andrew Vermiglio, which debates whether auditory processing exists at all. When you consider it as only being identified by this type of testing, he pretty much has said the only way we can identify it is really by self-report. Is the child having a problem? Is the adult having a problem? Are they tired? Are they mispronouncing things? Are they having a hard time in background noise? Do they have difficulty with fast running speech? Do they have problems with accents, etc., etc.? How well do they deal with information coming to both ears at the same time? Our tests are insufficient. There is no evidence that our tests are actually even identifying the things we need them to. And what they basically are doing is giving us a passcode to say to the schools, I want to be a little more centered with the camera. They're saying to the schools, you have to pay attention to this diagnosis. And I agree, they do need to pay attention. This is a real thing. The problem is our tests aren't actually identifying it. So we do need to include those tests, but they're kind of like condiments, honestly, like ketchup, salt, pepper. They aren't the main course. The main course is the trial. And the main course are the questionnaires and the interviews and the case history and the self-report. But the test just doesn't really matter because it doesn't mean anything, because it's not based on APD. It's based on physical differences that they originally based these things on. So when we do the test, we start with the trial before we do the test at all. And we do that because it gives us a very good idea, at least, of those children and adults who benefit from the trial. Because if you benefit from the trial, there was a problem. There is no one in their right mind who would go out wearing hearing aids for no reason. It's too annoying. It's too much of a hassle. It's too embarrassing for people to want to do that level of annoyance if there isn't really an issue, and you're not going to see the kind of benefits that we see from it. You're not going to see faster processing speed. You're not going to see better access to memory. You're not going to see fewer meltdowns like the child I saw earlier this week, the highly gifted autistic ADHD kid who didn't have a meltdown for 6 weeks until he refused to use the aids, and then he started melting down again. You're not going to see the guy who passed perfectly the APD testing in a country far, far away, use trials and find amazingly noticeable benefits in terms of his ability to make it through a day at work. These are not compatible ideas. So we start with the trial first. And the reason we start with the trial first is because it's very low risk financially, and it gives us a very, very good idea of who is likely, not necessarily to fail the APD testing because it is relatively pointless, but who's having problems. And we can find tests that will back that up. It's also a lot less risky because cost-wise, you're looking at about $100 that isn't refundable. And when you go into the testing, you're looking at anywhere from $600 or $700 for a very basic test to maybe $5,000 if you go out to Long Island to a particular doctor of audiology who's very well known with the school systems. They can go big range, and there's nothing refundable if it doesn't give you the information you need. So I'm a big believer in start with an actual test of benefit, a diagnostic trial, and then go to the testing, and preferably do it virtually so the child or adult can go home afterwards and not have a 3-hour or 5-hour or 2-day drive. And so they can do part of the test on one day and another part of the test on another day. And we could test them when they're tired, and we can test them when they're awake. We have so much more flexibility when we make it virtual, and so much more comfortable for these very sensitive individuals who already don't want to be going through this testing, that we don't have to pull them away from home, and we can already know what our answer is going to be from doing the trial. Now, not every time. There are people who we do the trial with where it doesn't work, probably 30% or so. It doesn't necessarily mean they're not having problems, but that's what questionnaires are for. That's what case histories are for. And if all of these self-reporting methods and testing with actual proof of benefit with something that reduces the symptoms doesn't work, we're still catching many, many more of these individuals who are having problems than a group of tests that were designed for brain tumors.